the beneficent, the merciful. The 2030 vision of the kingdom considered women as one of the enablers of strength in our country, and the government exerted no effort in empowering women because we believe that woman has an important role to play in our era. In this era, we have this distinguished development that invests in the huge capabilities owned by our nation, paving the way for a future that will reflect the abilities and the capabilities that woman has an important share of. Now we have a virtual meeting under the title of the empowerment of women and the KSA budget. After days of the announcement of the general budget of the kingdom, we'll discuss many things related to the empowerment of women in the fields of finances and the financial policies, also how to integrate women in the process for budgeting for the general budget of the kingdom, and the policies for empowerment of women, and the role of private sector in supporting representation of women. We'll open our floor with Mr. Abdulaziz bin Mutlaq al-Rashid.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. حرصت حكومة المملكة بقيادة خادم الحرمين الشريفين وسمو ولي عهده الأمين حفظهم الله على تعزيز الاستثمار في العنصر البشري ضمن رؤية المملكة 2030، والتي ترتكز على 3 محاور أساسية، وهي مجتمع حيوي واقتصاد مزدهر ووطن طموح، وتستند إلى مقومات المملكة ومكامن قوتها بهدف دعم المواطنين والمواطنات في تحقيق تطلعاتهم. ومن هذا المنطلق يتجلى لنا اهتمام القيادة الرشيدة بتنمية رأس المال البشري وتمكينه، وتحديدا فيما يخص تمكين المرأة السعودية. فخلال الإعلان عن الميزانية العامة للدولة لعام 2022 أكد سيدي صاحب السمو الملكي ولي العهد الأمير محمد بن سلمان أن دور المواطن اليوم أصبح محوريا في التنمية الاقتصادية، فهو يساهم مباشرة في تحقيق الإنجازات في مختلف المجالات والقطاعات الواعدة، وتحديدا فيما يخص زيادة مشاركة المرأة. وخلال السنوات الماضية تضافرت جهود جميع الجهات الحكومية في المملكة لتمكين المرأة ورفع مساهمتها في الاقتصاد والمجتمع، مع رفع نسبة مشاركة المرأة في سوق العمل وتقلدها للعديد من المناصب العليا في القطاعين العام والخاص في مختلف المجالات. كما تعمل المملكة بشكل مستمر على سد الفجوة بين الجنسين، امتثالا لما نصت عليه رؤية المملكة، وإيمانا بدور المرأة الفاعل في تنمية وتقدم الاقتصاد والمجتمع. ونتيجة للإصلاحات والسياسات التي قامت بها المملكة، فقد حققت المملكة في مؤشر المرأة في تقرير المرأة الأعمال والقانون الصادر عن مجموعة البنك الدولي تقدما كبيرا، حيث ارتفع المؤشر ليصل إلى 80 نقطة بناء على آخر الإحصائيات في شهر فبراير من العام 2021. وبالرغم من تبعات جائحة كوفيد-19 على العديد من فئات المجتمع، إلا أن سياسات تمكين المرأة لا تزال تحقق تقدما ملحوظا. كما أشاد تقرير مشاورات المادة الرابعة لصندوق النقد الدولي للمملكة العربية السعودية لعام 2021 بالإصلاحات القوية المستمرة في المملكة، مع الزيادة السريعة في مشاركة القوى العاملة النسائية السعودية، التي يقدر أنها ارتفعت بحوالي 13 نقطة مئوية إلى أكثر من 33% على مدى العامين الماضيين. وللمحافظة على استمرارية هذه الجهود ولأهمية دور وزارة المالية، تبنت الوزارة مبادرة ميزانية تمكين المرأة السعودية، وهي الأولى من نوعها في تاريخ الميزانية العامة للمملكة، والتي تهدف إلى ترجمة التزامات المملكة بشأن سياسات تمكين المرأة إلى التزامات في الميزانية العامة، من خلال تخصيص ميزانيات لتحقيق أهداف هذه السياسات بشكل منسق، ووضع مؤشرات قابلة للقياس، وذلك لتعزيز فعاليتها ورسم الخطط المستقبلية لتمويل أنشطة تمكين المرأة بما يتماشى مع أهداف رؤية المملكة 2030 وأهداف التنمية المستدامة للأمم المتحدة، وذلك لتعزيز النمو الاقتصادي الشامل والمستدام بمشيئة الله. وستقوم وزارة المالية ابتداء من ميزانية عام 2023 بتعزيز هذا النهج في عمليات إعداد الميزانية العامة، وذلك بالتعاون مع كافة شركائها من الجهات الحكومية المعنية لتنسيق سياسات تمكين المرأة المرتبطة بالميزانية، وذلك لضمان تخصيص الموارد المرتبطة بتمكين المرأة بشكل فعال. ونتطلع بعون الله تعالى للعمل معا لتحقيق الأهداف المرجوة من هذه المبادرة وفقا لتطلعات حكومتنا الرشيدة أيدها الله. وشكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Abdulaziz Rashid. Now, allow me to welcome my dear guest, Dr. Hala Mazid At-Tuwajri, Secretary General of the Family Affairs, Dr. Carolina Renthia, the Senior of the Head Department of the General Financial Affairs in the IMF, Ms. Samira Rashid from the Nahda University, and Ms. Hiola from the World Bank. We'll start our meeting speaking about the policies of empowering women in the general budget and how to integrate women in the budgeting process. We'll start with Dr. Hala At-Tuwajri. Dr. Hala, we are happy to have you with us today. Dr. Hala, as the Secretary General of the Families Association, how do you see the policies of the kingdom in terms of empowerment of women and the role of policies in protecting the rights, personal and social rights of women, and guaranteeing its women's representation in the decision-making process? Thank you, Doctor. Empowering women in Saudi Arabia, we cannot say that it is new if we link it back to the most important thing, which is the first important topic, which is the education of women that started long ago. But with the launch of the 2030 vision is just the acceleration of a number of reforms, initiatives, and projects and programs that contributed effectively to the empowerment of women and enhancing their participation in all different kinds and aspects of life. The approach that we are following is a comprehensive approach, empowering women that is now an integral part in all of the missions of all of the agencies in the kingdom now. This is the appropriate and the correct policy, because when we look now at the level of the countries who were ahead of us, they now have done a lot of things, and Ms. Selma also was at the G20 and they know about G20 affairs. So it should be a horizontal effort on all of the sectors. We cannot look at the empowerment of women as an independent file. Empowerment of women will be empowerment in labor, education, social development, even in the policies and the financial policies, like you said. This is the approach that we followed. And for example, on the international level, in the SDGs, which is the International Plan for Development, there is one plan which is equality between genders. But all people working in tracking and tracing the SDGs know well that the 17 goals include and have things related to the empowerment of women. This means that the implementation of the goal number 5 depends on the empowerment of women in all of the other 17 goals. And this is the approach that the kingdom followed for governance of this file until today. So today, when we look at this topic from a comprehensive point of view, we find that all things that we worked on followed the correct sequence. We started first with the legislative reforms. If there are laws that needed to be issued, they were issued. Laws that need to be adjusted, they were adjusted. If there are some articles and some of the laws that needed to be cancelled, removed, edited, amended, this has been done. And also referring to the World Bank report about women, mentioned that Saudi Arabia for 2 successive years was one of the top countries in terms of reforming of legislations. So legislation is the first pillar for empowering women that we worked on, but this is not enough, of course. And all countries that work on this file, the empowerment of women, know that laws will not do the work alone. We need, in order to make change, we need to follow the implementation of laws. We need to accompany them with projects and initiatives that will help us activate the role of these initiatives. And this happened through the vision of the Kingdom 2030. The first strategic goal is the increase of the women participation in the labor market. And this, in order to achieve it, we had to issue a package of initiatives that meet and fulfill the needs of women in all of the aspects of her life. For example, Qurra, in order for the care for children, Wusul, empowerment of women in leadership position, and others. So it means that we try to achieve all of the aspects that will help empower women, taking in consideration the balance between women's work and her role in her family. And this is what we, as all of you participated with us in previous meetings on the international level, we all know that the international society now speaks about this balance and the importance of having this balance in order to be able to say that we empowered women. Going back to the financial policies, this is a very important point, and it is always enlisted as on the agendas of the United Nations and also the agendas of international organizations. The budgets supporting and empowering women are they do exist, and we all know that all ministries have activities that support and promote the empowerment of women, and they have activities, and these activities has its items of the budget. But the methodology that we're working on, that was launched in this initiative, is that we should start from now enlisting and integrating the items of budgets and the codes that are used in order to be able to reach these budgets and to implement them and to know if we are on the right track in terms of the budgets dedicated for empowerment of women, or maybe we exceeded the budget or exceeded the international standards, or maybe we are behind. Or so we need the financial accounts in order to be able and to decide what needs to be done. Thank you very much, Dr. Hala. Now,
Ms. Rentria, thank you for being with us today. In your capacity as IMF Chief of Fiscal Affairs Department, how do you define budgeting for women, and how do you see the opportunities and challenges associated with it to support women empowerment?
Good afternoon. I hope you hear me well.
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And first, let me start by expressing my appreciation to the Saudi Ministry of Finance for inviting the IMF to this important event. And we are very pleased to see the strong intentions and commitments that Saudi Arabia is making through its Saudi Women Empowerment Budget Initiative. And what was just explained is a great example of all the different decisions and policies and legislative changes that have been made. The evidence for gender budgeting is clear. If it's designed thoughtfully, implemented effectively, and supported politically, gender budgeting can move the dial on empowering women and be a powerful instrument to address the gender gaps which hold back economies and societies. And let it be there no doubt, the IMF sees addressing gender inequality as crucial. It is not just the right thing to do. Women's empowerment is what we call macrocritical. It can transform entire economies. Our studies show that in countries with low female labor participation, closing this gender gap could raise GDP by an average of 35%. This comes from adding workers to the labor force, but also from a higher productivity and diversification, in part due to the complementarities between men and women who bring different skills and ideas to workplace. But adapting such policies is not enough. Their impact can be further amplified as part of a coherent gender strategy that is based on need, effectively designed, aligned with the budget process, and monitored and evaluated to improve implementation. This is the essence of gender budgeting. Gender budgeting brings the powerful tool of the national budget to bear on gender inequalities. It integrates gender into the policies and processes of public financial management and the planning, preparation, execution, and monitoring phases of the budget cycle. Let me emphasize, gender budgeting does not imply separate budget processes for women and men. It is about ensuring that sufficient resources are directed at tackling gender gaps and that intended and unintended consequences of budget decisions on gender equality are analyzed and fed back into policy making. The impact of good gender budgeting is now well recognized. The implementation of gender budgeting worldwide is targeted and tracked through the UN's SDGs, with the objective 5C1. According to FAD's database of nearly 100 countries, some 90% of them have reported clear benefits from gender budgeting, namely through the budget impact on gender equality, a greater focus on gender goals, and more progress incorporating gender objectives. Countries in the MENA region are also actively introducing gender budgeting. Let me give you some examples. Morocco has pioneered gender budgeting mainstreaming in the region since early 2000s, with great achievements in the incorporation of gender impact assessments, sex disaggregated performance indicators, and reporting. In Egypt, the gradual utilization of gender needs assessments and gender impact analysis in policy design has enabled the government to make it responsible to the COVID-19 crisis. And in 2020, the authority significantly expanded the coverage of those cash transfer programs to low-income households that primarily benefit women. And finally, countries such as Lebanon, Tunisia, and Jordan are highly engaged in strengthening their technical capacity and developing gender budgeting guidelines to ensure a successful implementation through the budget process. So we very much welcome now Saudi Arabia to join this club, in which more resources has focused following the good gender budgeting practices.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rentria. ننتقل الآن إلى أستاذة سلمى الراشد. أستاذة سلمى.
Ms. Salma, thank you for being with us. And we all know that the vision of the Nahda society or Renaissance society, it means that women is an integral part of Saudi Arabia. What are the objectives that you are trying to achieve, and how do you contribute to the achievement or the realization of the kingdom's vision objectives? Thank you very much, Dr. Rehan. Thank you for all the guests who are with us. Our association was established in the 1960s, 1962, and since its establishment, it aimed at empowering women to be an integral part in Saudi Arabia with the change of times, with the change of social, political, and economic discourse. And we make sure that the services delivered will fulfill and meet the needs of the women for almost 60 years now. We're working in different fields. The first field is the developmental work, working in the field and working directly with the families, with the children, with the women in order to provide them with the services. The other part is the research and analysis. We analyze and research the projects provided by these families. Do they meet the desired goals for these families? In addition to that, we measure and assess what happens on the floor. Dr. Hala mentioned the importance of policies and that policies alone are not enough. So through research, we try to know the impact of these policies on the ground. Are they being translated into real work on the ground in the lives of these families? Another domain or field is when we look at the projects that we have with the families on the ground and the research in order to have support for our causes for more than 60 years. Next year we will have the 60th anniversary. We have diversity of work in order to empower women and in order to achieve advocacy as well. And we had the consultancy as a non-profit organization. We had the consultancy representation in the OECD, and this gives us a good opportunity to serve our society on the international level, linking that to the 2030 vision. Of course, we live in this era of change, and these will be years to be remembered in history for centuries to come. As Dr. Hala mentioned, there are a lot of things that are being done there, like the acceleration of reforms, legislations that serve the empowerment of women. This made our work in a Nahda society has a lot of momentum. It was a big momentum because a lot of the legislative hinders were lifted and that were facing women and nonprofits and private sector in order to work to complement the role of the governmental sector and the private sector in order to empower women. I'd like also to mention that 2030 vision in the kingdom and what the Crown Prince has mentioned, there is a budget this year and we congratulate ourselves for this budget. and women participate, the participation of women is a positive force in the building and development of our society. So here we see a real direct translation of the objectives of the vision and a directive and the direction that all of the tracks and streams lead to the empowerment of women and how to empower women. This is a historical point of view. We are enthusiastic to be a part of this era. I'm also enthusiastic. Thank you very much, Ms. Selma. English.
Ms. Naiki, can you hear us?
I can hear the translation, but I guess we can work with that.
Okay. Ms. Naiki, I'm really happy that you joined us today. In your capacity as the practice manager in the governance global practice at the World Bank, how can effective governance support the policies to empower women in public finance? And most importantly, what type of steps that need to be taken in this regard?
Thank you very much, Madam Rian, and it's really a pleasure to be part of this today. I was really encouraged when I was listening to Dr. Ala and listening to all the big developments that is happening in the kingdom, involving women in budgeting, in several other aspects of governance and the progression on social rights of women. So, to answer your question, every aspect of governance is pertinent for the empowerment of women, starting with the laws or regulations to the policy formulation, the implementation, and the engagement with various stakeholders. You will probably know that the World Bank developed a gender strategy, which is built around four pillars. Pillar one is on improving human endowments, which includes issues related to health, education, and social protection. Pillar two involves removing constraints for more and better jobs. And this includes addressing quantity and quality of jobs that goes to the female gender. Pillar three involves removing barriers to women's ownership and control of assets. And the fourth pillar is on enhancing women's voice and engaging with men and boys. Now, looking at this specifically from the perspective of public finance, as you asked, effective gender governance first starts with defining policies to empower women in public finances. And this is an aspect that the World Bank plays a critical role in supporting government. To define policies for effective gender responsiveness, government needs reliable sex disaggregated data. And in many instances, data is not available at all or not in a format that enables government to make informed decisions. So to bridge the gap, the World Bank supports many projects that helps to fill the gender data and analytical gaps and to support evidence-based policy making. Let me give you an example. As we all know, governments are employers. As such, empowering women requires governments to know that the women are represented in the public service. The World Bank supports projects which includes automation of the human resource or payroll system for the public service. And this system would ensure a disaggregated sex data. And this is captured with details about the department, about the location, about the grade, the age, the level of education, amongst others. Now, this supports decision making in allocation of resources and better service delivery with clear gender considerations. And in addition, it helps the decision making, which promotes a better gender balance in leadership position where it's needed. So just to repeat, filling the data and analytical gap provides foundational evidence of better understanding the nature and the extent of gender gaps and to address the constraints. I mean, in this example I gave, it helps to build a budget that promotes gender inclusiveness in the public sector. Secondly, a way to support policies to empower women in public finances is deepening institutional and structural reforms that promote gender equality. For example, this could be done by strengthening public procurement frameworks so that it's more inclusive of women-owned businesses. Or to come back to our employment example, promoting fair and equal access to public sector jobs and merit-based performance opportunities. Thirdly, and more broadly, is a mechanism for including women in the country's general budget. A government must be very aware of the extent of which their budget practices and beyond budget, the PFM practices itself are gender responsive. I'll give you a core example. Many of us may know the Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability Secretariat, the PEFA Secretariat, which is funded by 9 development partners. The Secretariat developed what we call a gender supplementary framework, which focuses on gender itself. And this is a comprehensive, unique tool which supports mainstreaming of gender into government budgeting process. And it then helps to ensure that the gender responsive policies and services are implemented. So the purpose of the PEFA gender assessment is to provide a benchmark of performance and to highlight where progress has been made and identify the opportunities for many countries to make their PFM more gender responsive and use PFM to close the persistent gender inequality gap. So several countries have started this assessment. Some are finalized, others are in the process of discussing. So, let me stop it at that for now.
Thank you very much, Ms. Neke. وشكرا جزيلا للضيوف الكرام. فاصل قصير ونعود إليكم مجددا.
We're back, dear audience. Now we'll move to the second axis in which we will discuss the programs of financing the activities of empowering women and facilitating her access to these programs. Dr. Hala, there are no doubts that there are historical aspects and activities that supported families of Saudi Arabia, led by the Crown Prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, that helped Saudi women lead the representation of Arab women on the international level. Can you tell us about the most prominent transformations of this kind, giving your responsibility in terms of the Family Affairs Association? You have two aspects in this question. First, what happened at the national level, and secondly, what happened on the regional and international level. On the national level, we can speak about families in general and specifically about women. When we speak about the topic of women, it is a topic that includes all things. And here comes the role of the Family Affairs Council. Family Affairs Council is a coordinative council that has representations from all of the ministries, or a large number of the ministries, because it touches all of our lives. Women have important roles in our lives. And one of the most prominent things that we worked on in the council in the recent years is the development of the national strategy. It's a national strategy that is integrated, comprehensive, that looks at all the aspects of the life of the family, since the formation of the family until advanced states of age for the members of the family. We discussed and we studied and examined all of the needs of all different members of the family and the challenges that may face families and all the enablers, and we came up with this comprehensive national strategy that is the first of its kind for strategic planning for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's agencies. We didn't have a similar family strategy before. So this strategy and this developmental work that aims at developing and planning for all members of society, not just one segment, it's for all. And this is an advanced work. And when we asked experts in the international organizations and even in companies that worked before us and were ahead of us in providing similar strategies, we found that the countries that are more advanced, more developed, are the countries that have this kind of big high-level strategies. And we also found that the countries that are capable of issuing these national plans, comprehensive plans, activating them, utilizing them, usually develop and have a good renaissance and they have a good return on investment. When, for example, I give an example, it's maybe not closely, it's closely connected to the empowerment of women, but and it says that $1 paid on children, the return will be 12 to $14 on the national economy of the kingdom. So imagine the huge return of investment for these projects and programs. This is from one side. On the other hand, as mentioned by the colleagues with the World Bank or with the IMF, they mentioned the importance of investing in the empowerment of women. This is considered an investment, even if it's just it looks like social or developmental work. But the return on investment from these developmental national plans is way bigger than what is felt as other and bigger than other investment programs. And His Royal Highness the Crown Prince mentioned that. And we're about in launching the social development or the national development program, the logo was investing in humans because this is the real investment. So we invest in humans, in children, in families, in women, and the return on investment for this kind of investment, it's not just financial. Of course, it is there, but there are also other investments, moral investments, cultural, social investments, and also investment in terms of leading countries. And we have witnessed through our experience in the recent years a reflection of what is happening inside the kingdom on our stand internationally. In the international occasions in which we represented the kingdom for representing women or others, the results of the reports and indexes that are international, all of this is a reflection of what is going on now on the ground in the field in Saudi Arabia. And this leads us hopefully to leading these files in the future. Usually it is uh, a journey that starts with self-reforming, then speaking about our journey, then at the end of the day, leading others towards excellence. And this is the journey that we are starting now. And we noticed in the recent years, in 2020, the same year in which uh, we had the presidency of the G20, Saudi Arabia or Riyadh was the capital of Arab women when we headed or presided the Arab Women's Society. And we also, at the same year, that we led the empowerment of women file in the G20 countries. This indicates that these initiatives lead us or lead countries to be to become uh, the top in terms of leading these
Now
files.
we'll
Thank
go
you, Dr.
back to
Hala.
Ms. Carolina Rentria.
Now we'll go
Ms.
back to Ms.
Rentria,
Carolina Rentria.
how do you see the
Ms.
impact
Rentria,
of COVID-19
how do you
pandemic
see the
on women,
impact of
and
COVID-19
what type
pandemic
of
on
role
women,
of budgeting
and
for
what
women
type of
should play to
role
mitigate the
of budgeting
consequences
for
of this
women should
pandemic
play to
and
mitigate the
support women
consequences of
programs
this
and growth?
pandemic and support women programs and growth?
Thank you very much. So now it could not be more timely to be discussing decisions while we are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and now with Omicron chasing us. As in many regions in the world, women in MENA account for most of the health and social care workforce, leaving them more exposed to the risk of infection. They also face great challenges in employment, with large shares of women working in sectors most heavily affected by the pandemic. The UN estimates that in the Arab world, we'll lose some 700,000 jobs as a result of the pandemic. Around the world, examples abound of disproportionate impact of lockdown policies on women and girls. 1 million Japanese women left the labor work market when the pandemic hit, while labor force participation by men changed far less. In Chile, 76% of women reported spending more time on domestic chores since COVID-19 began. And Mexico saw a 53% increase in emergency calls related to violence against women. The Malala Fund estimates that 20 million girls in developing countries may never return to the classroom after pandemic-related school shutdowns. So gender budgeting becomes a very powerful approach to supporting women in the recovery, but also empowering women in the long run to build stronger and more resilient economies. For example, gender budgeting can support the assembly of evidence to assess the impact of the pandemic and lockdown on women and girls. A response without a sense of the size of or location of the problem is like throwing a dart in the dark. Presenting the evidence in a single document, such as a gender needs assessment, can focus policy efforts. However, the best policy intention in the world cannot overcome poor policy design. Gender impact assessments can be used to strengthen that design by assessing the proportion of female beneficiaries and potential barriers to access. Answering gender policy goals through budget circulars and gender budget statements ensures sufficient resources are channeled to these goals. Benefit, they also provide confidence and transparency to the public. And a final example, government can track expenditures and evaluate impacts. So tracking gender-focused funds in the budget policy evaluations and gender performance audits can provide timely feedback to course correct where needed and to ensure that policies are working. And now I am very pleased to see that Saudi Arabia is taking steps in this direction of this very important agenda through the Saudi Women Empowering Budgeting Initiative. In particular, I welcome the initiative's objectives, which include translating the kingdom's commitment regarding women's empowerment policies into commitments in the general budget, raising the efficiency of spending on women's empowerment policies, and analyzing the effect of general budget decision on women's empowerment policies. And we have heard many more examples this morning of legislation changes and in the development plan. Making concrete and sustained steps in these directions would entail important levers into women's economic empowerment. Experience tells us that implementing gender budgeting is not easy. It takes a strong political commitment and equally strong capabilities of public administration, open to a reform of both processes and mindsets. But I believe Saudi Arabia can meet these challenges. And from the IMF perspective, we think this is a challenge worth meeting with full force and one which we actively support countries in addresses. The IMF has provided support to 124 countries through capacity development and training activities, and we'll be happy to explore how to support Saudi Arabia implement gender budgeting. Thank you.
achieve, ensure achieving the social justice. When we speak about winning uh, advocacy, it means that we mobilize the support of decision makers, private sector, non-profit sector, academia, and all people in our or society to support the causes of women and the cases related to women. So regarding acquiring or winning advocacy, we try to impact reforms and change politically in order to enhance women and family. We're not speaking about family without speaking about women and vice versa. We make sure that there is following up on the implementation of these policies and its impact on the ground and how to improve these policies and how to make sure that there is enhancement of women's participation in the public and private life. When we speak about another society's uh, implementations or initiatives through our long history, we worked on winning advocacy since the 60s, whether in the beginning of the establishment of the Ministry of Social Affairs at that time. We worked on building the milestone of the ministry at that time, in addition to teaching or old women, because we said that it starts in promoting women or empowering women starts with schools. We found at that time that there is a gap in the education of women, so we worked on that. Also, establishing houses to protect the victims of violence before we had laws to protect them. Also, getting women into the labor market. We worked with the Ministry of Labor in the 90s on making sure that the work environment will be supportive for women at work, in addition to the municipality uh, elections in 2015, and the list goes on. If we speak about today and try to celebrate the achievements, the recent achievements of Al-Nahda society in this field, Al-Nahda society in 2020, as mentioned by Dr. Hala, that despite of the pandemic, we achieved a lot of achievements in the kingdom in that year. Al-Nahda led the G20 communication group for women, and in parallel, we worked on a series of national dialogues on all over the kingdom. And one of the outputs of these series of dialogues is a list of the recommendations for policies that would enhance the economic participation of women. One of these recommendations is the inclusion in decision making, and there was a recommendation that we came up with, and these were participatory work of all people of our society, all individuals of society, and we have participation from different people from different agencies. And Dr. Hala from the Family Affairs Council supported us in this initiative. The recommendation said that we need to have consideration for the gender uh, budgeting. And now in 2021, we celebrate that this recommendation for empowerment of women is achieved through the budget of the kingdom. This is a huge achievement that we are celebrating. And in addition to that, as mentioned by the colleague from the IMF, that it is important to have budgets and to consider the needs of gender needs in these policies and the importance of the political will. And now in Saudi Arabia, we have this strong political will from top down and from bottom up. So it's not only political will, but also the social society and all different sectors of society in order to participate. But in the Women Communication Group in G20 in 2020, in cooperation with the UN Commission for Women, we issued a statement directed to the ministries of finances and the governors of the central banks, uh, asking them to provide gender budgeting, and this was issued in 2020 in addition to the recommendations in 2020, and now we're celebrating the achievement. So I started with history, but we are. Thank you very much, Ms.
Now we'll be
Selma.
back to Ms. Nake.
Now
Ms.
we'll be
Nake,
back to Ms.
according to the
Nake.
World
Ms.
Bank,
Nake,
in the last
according
two
to the
decades,
World
the world has
Bank,
narrowed the
in the
divide
last two
between men and
decades, the
women,
world has narrowed the
especially in
divide
primary
between men and
education and
women,
health.
especially in
Yet,
primary
progress
education and health.
on many fronts has
Yet
been
progress
limited.
on many
In your
fronts has
view,
been
what other
limited.
focus area
So,
the
on your
world
view,
still
what other
needs to
focus areas
accelerate
that
the
the world
progress for
still
women
needs to
empowerment?
accelerate the progress for women empowerment?
Thanks very much, Madam Riham. You're very right about some progress in bridging the gap between men and women. I mean, has been very obvious. As I mentioned earlier, one pillar of the World Bank strategy, Pillar 3, focuses on removing the barriers to women's ownership and control of assets, which means improving conditions under which women can secure ownership and control over productive assets. So this is one core area that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. This also includes access to finance and insurance, which is needed to acquire those assets. And this is one core area that the World Bank is focusing on. I mean, I would like to talk of some programs supported by the bank, which I believe are great examples of area that all countries can build on in these aspects of gender equality or strengthening the gender agenda. I mean, the bank supports country programs which is focused on access to finance, and I believe, I mean, we're also engaging with the kingdom on this. And this access to finance as they expand women's economic opportunities, and specifically access to finance is done, I mean, in several ways. One is by strengthening financial regulatory frameworks to avoid further exclusion of vulnerable groups, including women. Another way is by increasing women's financial access, and this is including through the development of digital financial services and the use of risk-sharing instruments. This is another way to support the women. I mean, another way would be supporting financial services for women-led enterprises, including financial consumer protection, financial education, financial capability activities, which is directed to the needs of women. Also, I mean, in similar way, the bank also supports programs that facilitate access to markets for women. And I mean, again, these are things that many countries can do in order to continue to promote these gender engagements. And I mean, I have four examples of ways that this can be done. Well, it could be through capacity building to support women in starting and growing their businesses and adapting to climate change. We know climate change is now a very big thing all over the world. Another way is support for e-government procurement systems. I mean, like e-government marketplaces. And this can be actually focused to women-led micro, small, and medium enterprises to strengthen their access to public procurement markets. A third way could be through gender-sensitive sector and value chain mapping. And this is aimed at identifying opportunities to move women to higher skill, better paid employment. And I mean, a fourth way is increasing access to networks, to information, to trade, to market opportunities by integrating gender into industry projects. But I would just like to end this particular question with one core thing that the previous speaker said, which is the leadership and the political will. Without this very important part, it's very hard to move this agenda forward. So the leadership is pertinent, the political will is pertinent, and I believe the kingdom is really doing very great work in these aspects. So I'll stop here, Madam Riam.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nike.
And thank you very much, dear audience. Now we'll move to the third axis, in which we will discuss the private sector and its role in enhancing the empowerment of women and her representation. Dr. Hala, the kingdom in the recent years won a package of wins that helped women be represented in the international world. For example, like your presidency of the team of empowering women in G20 under the presidency of Saudi Arabia. Can you tell us about this experience? Thank you very much, Dr. Reham. When we led this file in front of the kingdom, and we were speaking about this file, and we're still working on it now under the presidents, whether under the presidency of Italy and now under the presidency of Indonesia. Now we're working, and this file started years ago, and it is inherited by all of the president countries, and they deal with it according to the agreed upon procedures. And we have dealt with this file in a different manner through the establishment or the creation of an internal team in Saudi Arabia under the title of the Women Empowerment Team, working in partnership with all of the working and communication groups. And Sama has witnessed this work very well. So the idea is that we put and we set some priorities for the empowerment of women, and these priorities were nested with the different working groups for employment, for example, different working groups for the financial sector, for education, and our role was to coordinate and to make sure that this agenda is existing and utilized in order to support women. And we used to attend the meetings for all of the working groups, and we gave them a hard time in order to achieve the goals. So our ultimate goal was to ensure that this file is tackled seriously, professionally, and one of the most important achievements is that no statement from the ministries of the different working groups or the final statement was mentioned without mentioning the commitments of these groups that was translated later towards the empowerment of women. This is from one side. From the other side, when the president with Saudi Arabia was the president of the G20 round, we launched the Empower Alliance, which is an alliance for empowering women in the leading positions in the private sector. This alliance was established by the presidency of Japan at the presidency of Japan 1 year before our presidency of the G20, but it was just an announcement of the alliance. We inherited this file and we worked on creating, uh, drafting, and setting and developing the basic governance of this alliance, and also launching 3 of the basic outcomes that are related to, as mentioned a while ago, to the statements, statistics, best experiences that were collected from the G20 countries. So this also was a polarization of another aspect of the empowerment of women that was put in the frame that it will be from the private sector to the private sector. So the private sector also the engineering of this alliance and how it was established in Japan before it comes to Saudi Arabia, that for each country there will be at least 2 representatives, one from the private sector and one from the government. The goal is that work will not be separate from the support provided from governments, especially related to the uh, empowering of women in the leading positions and senior positions and others. So we were there in the Empower Alliance. It is still there, and it was in the final decision for the leaders, final statement for the leaders in Italy. They extended the alliance for the coming 4 years. It means that it enhanced and achieved the momentum required, and also provided us with a good opportunity of empowering for women in the private sector. And there are other uh, objectives that are going to be achieved in the future. This is our story in the G20 presidency, and it is worthy to be mentioned that Italy started their first ministerial meeting for the empowerment of women in the history of the G20 meetings. But in the first statement of that meeting, they thanked Saudi Arabia a lot because Saudi Arabia was the one that established the existence of this work on the ministerial level toward the empowerment of women, and also uh, organized a number of workshops, symposia like what we are in today, focusing on the file of women that was translated after that into a ministerial meeting. And it was stated to be as an ongoing annual conference for the empowerment of women accompanying the G20 activities.
Ms. Rintria, in your view, how do you see the role of the private sector in supporting women economic representation in collaboration with the public sector?
Thank you for the question. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the private sector employs a large share of the labor force worldwide, and therefore it is an essential partner in improving women's economic empowerment. For instance, through inclusive hiring and promotion policies, women's work development, and allocating procurement spending to women-owned businesses. Implementing policies that encourage hiring of women and resolve pay inequality in the workplace and help eliminate broader gender disparities in the workplace, such as providing guaranteed parental leave and childcare, can go a long way in improving women's economic empowerment. Saudi Arabia has made significant strides in improving the participation level of Saudi females in the labor force. It is estimated to have increased by close to 13 percentage points to reach over 33% in the last 2 years. It is important to note that private sector has played a major role in this increase, as it is hiring women at twice the rate of the public sector. But despite these improvements, female labor participation remains less than half of male participation and even less in managerial positions. The share of women in managerial positions and decision-making bodies is around 16% on average, with the lowest in the region, with the lowest rate in Saudi Arabia, 10%, and the highest rate in Kuwait, 26%. But all that we have heard today, and just this seminar and this webinar, shows the importance of the topic and how Saudi Arabia is walking the path to improve the conditions for empowering women. So I think there are many opportunities for a fruitful partnership between the private and the public sector, with the shared goal of improving women's economic representation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rentria.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rantria. Ms. Salma, you chaired the delegation of the Kingdom and the Women Communication Group for the 2020 G20 under the presidency of Saudi Arabia. For your experience, how was your experience, and how was the reflections and the reactions of the rest of the group on that, and what is its result? There are a group of Saudi women who paved the way for us and taught us the opportunity to deal with them, and they were a good example for us to be followed in order to represent the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on the international level. I had the honor to chair the delegation of the Kingdom since 2018 in Argentina, in Japan, and in 2020, and this year in Italy. And tomorrow is the transaction of the presidency to Indonesia regarding our topic, and we will continue working with the delegations. Dr. Hala also mentioned also the issues of women and causes of women. We see that this is the responsibility of caring, the responsibility of interests of women, and what women want to achieve in terms of uh, balance between caring and working. All of these things are the same challenges all over the world. So it gave us the opportunity to work internationally and to learn from others, to exchange experiences, and to make sure that we work together on the international level, on the level of the G20, to work on a very clear, important, and agenda, putting women on the basics of this agenda and making sure that our plans are comprehensive, inclusive, that meets the needs of all. What we also could achieve last year in 2020, or maybe the year before the last year, we're almost finished with 2021. I learned from working with Dr. Hala. I worked with her for a number of years, and also under the leadership of Thuraya Abed. Dr. Thuraya Abed in the international world, and I learned a lot from her. She was the chairman of the Women Communication Group in 2020. In the year 2020, as mentioned by the IMF colleague, that we still have the same topics that we deal with, but what we could achieve in the final statement of the G20, the G20 2020, are a number of policies to accelerate the economic empowerment of women and to make sure that the pandemic will not cause any delay in the progress. The first group was measures that needed to be achieved for the recovery, economic recovery that includes everyone, making sure that women was uh, at what women was impacted by, and also we wanted to make sure that G20 will investigate the agenda of the SDG agenda for the United Nations and how to make sure that uh, will be strong and sustainable. This is on the international level, on the level of the G20. It's also important that the needs of countries all over the world are different, even inside the G20. So the needs of women in Saudi Arabia are different from the needs of women in France and Japan and South Africa and India and Indonesia. Needs are different, and uh, women's life and nature is different, not only on the G20 level, but also on the Arab level and the national level. As I mentioned before, we had a series of national dialogues that helped us bridge this gap and see the discussion on the international level when reflected on the national level and the local level. What are the importance and the priorities for the Saudi women from the international, from the local level, as we worked with our colleagues from different organizations in the Gulf region in the year 2021. We worked on uh, an event that went in parallel with the work of the group of the position of women in G20 to discuss the position of women in the Gulf states, given that women's position is similar in this area. So it's not only on the G20 level, but we tackle the situation on the national and local level as well. And women in Riyadh and the different cities of the kingdom, because they're different with the difference of countries. Thank you very
Now
much,
we'll
Ms.
move
Selma.
to our final
Now we'll
question.
move
Ms.
to our
Naiki,
final question. Ms.
our
Naiki,
final question is for you.
Ms. Naiki, our final
As you know,
question
Saudi
is for
Arabia
you.
support the global
As you know,
and
Saudi
domestic
Arabia
effort to
supported the
empower
global
women,
and domestic
including via
efforts
the World Bank
to
Women
empower women,
Entrepreneurs Finance
including
Initiatives,
the Riyadh World
WeFi.
Bank
In your opinion,
Entrepreneurs Final
what other countries can learn from
WeFi.
Saudi
In your
Arabia
opinion, what
and other
can other
nations that
countries
support
learn from Saudi
WeFi
Arabia
to
and other
advance
nations
global
that
and
support
domestic
WeFi in order
effort
to
in this
advance
area?
global and domestic efforts in this area?
Thank you very much, Dr. Riam. Very important question. Just before I go into it, I just want to say, I mean, many of us would have had the saying, train a girl child and you train a nation. And I believe that's one very core part that is coming out from this very important webinar. And the fact that there's quite a lot of good work that is going on in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that other countries can learn from. So, I mean, if you ask me, many other countries can benefit from the good examples of the kingdom. And one of the ways is through webinars of this nature. I mean, when they, because information is power. So when they get information about what is happening in the country or in the kingdom, then they know how they can progress in whatever it is they are doing. So, talking about the enabling environment, about the leadership and the political will, about the policies that are specifically put in place to promote gender strengthening, if I may call it that, is very core to supporting other countries in moving ahead. But just to go back to the World Bank strategy on gender that I spoke to before. So amongst other things, one of the core aspects is supporting in expanding the women's economic opportunities. And since we're talking about the public sector, this becomes very important now. So, from the perspective of the World Bank, we support programs in areas in which women face constraints to economic participation. And that's one of the areas that the program you refer to, the Women Entrepreneurs and Finance Initiative, becomes very key. So, I mean, if you look at the areas that the program or the bank is keen on, one is the business environment, and specifically the legal and regulatory framework. And other countries can learn from the examples of what has happened in the kingdom. So we're talking about the systemic assessment of restrictions, of protections and benefits, and the private sector related laws and regulations. We're talking about the support for the removal of all the legal and regulatory constraints which inhibit women's economic opportunities. So these are the things that countries can learn from what the kingdom is doing. I mean, other areas are also, the aspects on the firm and entrepreneur capabilities, and this includes providing capacity building to support women in starting and growing their business. This is core, and I see this coming again and again in this conversation, and this is really very encouraging, and I think will benefit other countries. Although also building capacity in women-owned and managed firms. I repeat that: women-owned and managed firms, to become suppliers to large multilateral enterprises, and integrating with global value chains. So this is very core, and I believe these are good examples that are coming out from the kingdom and that other countries can benefit from. So thanks, Dr. Rian. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nike.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nike. And here we come to the end of our questions and the conclusion of our meeting. Thank you for being with us, and I would like to thank our guests for being with us, enriching our um, meeting, the first with the gender budgeting for the empowerment of women, the first of its kind in our history of budgeting. And also would like to meet